test of the emergency warning system.
We can wait.
That's all right.
This is
Yeah.
only a test. If this had been an actual emergency,
There'd be more screaming.
instructions.
Hi, this is Moby. Welcome to the Fire Show. Art Markman, PhD, is a professor of psychology and marketing at the University of Texas. He's also the founding director of the program in the Human Dimensions of Organizations, a new set of interdisciplinary curriculum at the University of Texas. That was also the first time I ever said out loud interdisciplinary. I hope that didn't fuck it up. Art's research focuses on how people perceive things to be similar and the back-end processes involved in decision-making, category learning, and analogy comparison. Art has, at this point, 6 books on psychology, leadership, and organizational change, with another one on the way. His latest one is called Brain Briefs, Answers to the Most and Least Pressing Questions About Your Mind, where he, along with Bob Duke, PhD, co-host of his podcast, answers questions such as, why do we love kittens so much? Does time speed up as we get older? Should we play brain games? And lastly, or actually just one of them, can we make ourselves happy? Wow, that's a big one. That is a big one. Other books of Art include Smart Change, Smart Thinking, Habits of Leadership. Outside of his books, he writes regularly at Fast Company, Scientific American, Psychology Today, and lastly, he's also the host of Two Guys on Your Head, a podcast with a great name, and also a podcast about psychology and how humans make decisions. I met Art at a panel he was on and connected with him shortly after. There was a period that I wanted to do an episode about decision making, but since his resume consists of so many successful and impressive books, I thought let's just do an episode about writing a book. But we'll probably do another episode about something else soon. Alright, so this episode is about how to write a book, something that a lot of people are curious about because they think that it will make them rich and famous. Also, you know, who doesn't want to say, I am an author? Not that I wrote a book, I am an author. Interesting stuff. Anyway, so we talk about how the process of writing a book works. When it's a solo book versus a book with someone else. Writing a book in which you refer to your own research or use someone else's research. How to get started with writing something like this. What you need to sell. Hint, it's a lot. Oh my god, it is so hard. Whew. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, if you hate it, please let me know. If you like it, please let me know. If you love it, please let me know. Anything else bothers you at 3 a.m. at night? Please let me know. I am at Fire Show Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and the Facebooks. To connect with Art, you can tweet him at AB Markman. That's Markman, so it's AB Markman. You can read his stuff on Fast Company, Scientific American, and Psychology Today. He has a lot of great stuff and a lot of great things on it. So you can also listen to his podcast and radio show, Two Guys on Your Head, whose Twitter is at 2GOYH. That's 2GOYH, Two Guys on Your Head. All right, ladies and germs, and gents, wonderful gents that I just called germs. I'm sorry about that. Enjoy. Damn.
All right.
How are you, Art?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, good. How's the semester going?
You know, I hesitate to say busy because that's the standard answer everybody gives to everything, but busy.
Busy as always?
Yeah, just, you know, I'm lucky enough to have too much to do and not enough time to do it, which I prefer to not really having enough to do.
Yeah.
So,
I always just get bored and think, what's the meaning of all of this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can't get too bored.
No.
And I just saw a student come in, and we were chatting before about just how panicky undergrads can be. And now I'm in grad school, And it's not that bad. I am
Yeah.
much more chill than before.
Yeah.
It's like, I just got to pass. That's it.
Right. Well, and also, I think, K to 12, at some point, grades start to matter. And I guess, and they do really have an impact on your future in the sense that the better the grades that you get, the better the college you can get into. And while you don't necessarily need to go to the very top college, certainly the quality of the college that you go to has an effect on the kinds of people you bump into and the kinds of experiences you get. So I could make the case for grades K to 12 having an impact. Yeah. There's very little impact of your grades in college on anything you do afterwards, even your ability to go into a graduate program. I mean, I always like to point out that I'm a psychology professor at one of the top psychology programs in the country. I got B's in most of my psych classes in college, because at the end of the day, it's not really about the grades you get in things. It's about what you know and what you know how to do. And I think students spend way too much time worrying about the evaluation and not so much on are they actually learning something and are they going to be able to use that knowledge to do something later. And I think what happens is by the time you get to grad school, you begin to realize, that actually the grades aren't really why I'm here. And then it's not about trying to please some instructor. It's can I learn something in this process that is going to help me to do whatever I do next.
Well, for the last few weeks, have you seen Whose Line Is It Anyway?
I know of it. Yeah, I haven't actually watched it.
I'm reminded of that line a lot. Everything's made up, and the points don't matter.
Yeah,
and I love that a lot.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's exactly it. So it really is all about learning to do stuff, and if you learn it in school, that's great. If you learn it somewhere else, that's great. And you can get A's in all of your classes and never actually really learn anything, So I think people have to kind of take education in that spirit.
Absolutely, and I think what you said recently, right now, actually, about it's not about the grades, it's about what you know, is a great analogy for what we're going to be talking about today, which is it's not about having a book, it's about teaching something in a book. Yeah. And so I went through and obviously I Googled you. And so you've written 6 books and edited a few more.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And the most recent one was Brain Briefs.
Yes.
And the first one was Knowledge Representation?
The first book I ever wrote was Knowledge Representation, which was aimed at, 30 people on planet Earth. That's a much more technical book. So knowledge representation is basically, so for those computer science geeks out there, the first computer science course you take is usually just basic, how do you program something? And then the second or third class you take is a class on what are called data structures and algorithms, where you learn here are the various ways that you can organize your data, and then here are the procedures that organization supports or makes difficult. And the book Knowledge Representation basically says you can actually play the same game for theories of the way the mind works, that there are lots of proposals that are essentially proposals about the data structures of the mind, and each of those supports different kinds of processes, makes certain things easy to do and certain things hard to do, and that treating our understanding of psychology that way has benefits for people who are trying to explain how thinking works. And so...
And the audience was 30 people?
Well, it was it might have been 30. Yeah, it might have been 40. It was not many. But it was not something anyone had ever really said before in quite that way, and it was something that required a whole book to say it. Right, which I think are two of the criteria for actually wanting to do a book on something.
And so I see, I've got a list right in front of me, and so you went from knowledge representation, cognitive psychology, to smart thinking, leadership, smart change, brain briefs. Did your audience expanded over the years? Is that correct?
It's about 70 now. Yeah,
it's about 70.
Yeah, well, my career had a bit of an evolution, I think, which is early in an academic career, of course, what you're rewarded for is speaking to those 30 people on planet Earth who do something very similar to what you do, because that's the community of people who are engaged in research at whatever the leading edge of your field is. And certainly, that's a lot of the academic papers that I've written and some of the academic books were aimed at that audience and continue to be aimed at that audience. I still have graduate students engaged in brand new research and still write research papers and things like that. But about 12 years ago, I also, for several reasons, began to start thinking about how to communicate more about the field of psychology to a broader audience. Part of that was because I got really tired of politicians who would try to remove funding for behavioral science research because they would look at the titles of people's grants and decide that they didn't that the research didn't matter.
Wow.
And partly because I felt like actually people would benefit from knowing more of what we've learned in our field, that the three mature sciences in the early 20th century were biology, chemistry, and physics. And the reason that matters is because that's the same time that we were systematizing education. And so if you think about the science education that most people get, it is organized around biology, chemistry, and physics. Big fans of those sciences. I'm glad people learn them, but most people will never split an atom at home. They will obey the law of gravity whether they know about it or not. They don't mix a lot of chemicals, and they don't necessarily dissect anything, right? And I'm being a little facetious here, but the fact is everyone is going to encounter their own psychology and the psychology of other people, and yet very few people K to 12 in their education get much psychology. Mm-hmm. And even in college, they may not get much. And yet they're going to struggle with people issues and also personal issues for a long time, where they would actually benefit from knowing a little bit more about what the field knows. And so for both of those reasons, I really felt like it was important to add into my list of tasks
absolutely
some communication to a broader audience. And so blogging was a way of doing that. Book writing was a way of doing that. My own radio show podcast is a way of doing that. And these are all just opportunities to try to reach people who might learn something from what my field knows.
And when you started that, was Smart Thinking the first book along those lines?
So Smart Thinking was the first book that was aimed at a broader audience, but it wasn't the first writing I did for a broader audience. So I started. There are two things that came together that helped me to write Smart Thinking. The first was I started actually blogging in 2008 when very few people knew what the word blog meant yet. And that was valuable because to say something interesting to somebody in 500 words who's not already an expert in your field requires learning to write in a very different way than you have to write when you're writing a scientific paper. And so, a lot of times authors talk about this idea of finding a voice. And in some ways, blogging was a great way to find a voice without doing it on a 70,000-word project. So that was one piece that led to that. And then the other piece was that while I was perfectly happy to give away a lot of what I know through blogs and things like that, it turns out that there are some people who won't listen to what you have to say unless they're paying for the information, and I'm not going to stand in their way.
Okay.
and so I have had companies over the years who've approached me and asked me to consult for them, and one of those companies actually asked me to develop some classes for their employees, and I put together several one-day classes, one of which was a class that I ended up calling Maximizing Mental Agility, and the content of that class in various ways ended up in the book Smart Thinking.
Mm-hmm. And I've actually seen that in a lot of authors, regardless of whether their background is academic or not, that if they're teaching something, a method to execute on in business or your personal life, they have workshops, they have different kinds of content. And so this is kind of where I start with the roadmap kind of way. And I heard this about business, and I hear this about companies and all that. It is when you start something, you have to be able to answer the question, who is this for? What does it do? These two questions.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. I think a lot of times people who are interested in writing a book are focused primarily on, I want to have this object called a book that I've written, and they're not necessarily thinking about who's going to buy this book and how's it going to influence them. And those are actually important questions to ask up front, because if nobody's going to buy the book, you have to ask yourself why you're writing it. And if the answer is just vanity, then go for it.
Yeah.
Who am I to get in the way of someone's vanity? But if you're actually trying to affect people, you'd like to have some sense of who and how you're going to do that. And the other thing is, if you're going to write a book and you want people to buy it, you actually have to have some idea of how you're going to make people aware of it in order to buy it. I think a lot of people have this assumption that they're going to write a book and they're going to sell it to a publisher, and the publisher's going to publish it, and then people are just going to flock to it.
Yeah.
And if your name is already a household name, it's just yeah.
This is a test of the
Oh,
emergency
yeah.
warning system.
We can wait.
That's all right.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
only a test. If this had been an actual emergency,
There'd be more screaming.
instructions would follow.
Oh, yeah, it's 11:50, right? Yeah, I got that text.
Yeah.
I'll
All
just
right.
cut that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. No, I'll leave it in. Why
Yeah.
not? But I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself is,
Is it going to come back? Oh, it's
I think
gone.
we're done.
Cool.
That's
cool.
it. All right. You really want to have a sense of how you're going to sell the book, and if you're already a household name, then people are going to buy your book.
Yeah.
So Bruce Springsteen writes a book, and he doesn't have to sell it very hard. He has to make a few people aware that it exists, and then people are going to go, "Oh, Bruce Springsteen, I know that guy. I'm going to buy his books." But if your name isn't quite on the tip of everyone's tongue like his might be, then you need to have some alternate strategy for convincing people that your book is one that they'd like to buy. And so understanding who your audience is and how you intend to reach them is actually an important part of the process before you ever start writing anything. And so I think one of the reasons why people also have seminars that they do and things like that go along with the book is because that is a part of a package that helps you to ultimately sell the message that you're trying to sell to people.
Absolutely. And so just to clarify it for the audience, and let me know, because you know way more about this than I do. So I think of just if I were to broadly categorize books, there would be fiction, and then within nonfiction, there's things like history, where you're just telling someone what happened, or there's these kind of mix of you're gathering a lot of information sources and talking about something like psychology, business, self-improvement, people like Malcolm Gladwell or Daniel Pink. And these are the books we're kind of talking about, where people want to be subject matter experts and be seen as that. And if, for example, someone is of a certain age and they say, I know about this field a little bit, and I'm really, really obsessed with this one idea. I want to write about it. And let's pretend that they're not vain for a bit.
Yeah,
and it's
sure.
not that they want to have a book. Want to have their name in the book, even though that sounds fantastic. I can see your books, like 3 books, like the copies. That looks great.
It's cool.
It's cool. I'm sure it's cool. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, how would I start if I say I have a clear? This is where I am. I have a problem I want to solve for a certain audience.
Yeah.
Let's say they're 35 to 45 and they have XYZ problem. And I know that there's 50 information sources and I have to read papers and other books and I can get that. but I really want to make this a book. How do I start? Should I go to a publisher? Should I start blogging or?
Yeah. So I think there's several things you have to do at the same time, right? So
I like that. Okay.
One of them is I think blogging is a great way to get started because for several reasons. One, it helps you to find that voice that is clear and that you figure out what people resonate to through the comments that you get, both the unsolicited comments you get whenever you blog for somewhere, as well as having friends and other people read what you've written and giving you hopefully honest feedback. So I think blogging is great for that. Blogging is also useful because it sometimes helps to clarify the complexity of the thing that you're thinking about. There are times where you think, oh, I've got this nailed. And then you sit down to write about it and you realize, wow, this is way more complicated than I thought it was. And so that's a way of playing around with the ideas before you commit to this is what a book is going to look like, which is where you need to be by the time you put a proposal in front of a publisher. The other reason why blogging is helpful in creating a presence in that kind of digital sphere is valuable is because this is part of how you begin to develop an audience. That is, the people who find the things that you write interesting are going to be much more prone to purchase your book than some random person on the street who has never heard of you and doesn't know whether you are a trusted source. And so building up a following and having your own Facebook author page and Twitter feed and LinkedIn page and building up the number of people that you have following you. Not that every person who follows you on some social media channel is going to buy your book, but they're going to be much more prone to buy your book than someone who stumbles on you randomly or stumbles on your book randomly. So I think that doing things like blogging is a great initial foray into a book. From there, I think it's also important to try to find audiences that you can speak to. And there are two reasons for wanting to do that kind of speaking. One, because it gives you very immediate feedback on whether what you're saying and the way you're saying it is clear. Because there's nothing like the glazed eyes of an audience to tell you that you have utterly failed to make your point. Either failed to make it because it wasn't clear or because it wasn't the least bit entertaining. And if somebody's going to wander along with you for a 70,000-word journey in your book, there's going to have to be something that compels them to move forward with you. And that's so part of that voice is it has to be a voice people want to listen to. And on top of that, the kind of speaking you do becomes another one of these offerings that is part of getting people to buy the book, because the publisher will print your book and they may even be able to get your book into bookstores or on Amazon, but they can't force someone to buy the book.
What? That's crazy. Yeah.
I know. It's not. It's just not right. So you end up doing a tremendous amount of the marketing of your own book. And so the more speaking you do, the more that you are creating opportunities in the future to go speak to a group. And now, as part of your speaking fee, why don't you buy a few hundred copies of my book? So I think that's another thing that's important to do early on. And then as you begin to develop the idea, that's the point at which I think you can approach an agent to help you work with the publishers. And if you're going to try to publish with one of the major publishing houses as opposed to self-publishing a book, and an argument can be made these days for doing some self-publishing depending on the size of the audience you think you can reach. But if you're going to try to go with one of the major publishers, I think it's really important to work with an agent because for several reasons, they know the industry, which means that it's hard to approach publishers yourself because you don't even really know what should go into a book proposal, and they can read it and help with that. The other thing that's really important about agents is the standard contract that a publisher is likely to offer you is very unfavorable to authors and favorable to publishing houses. When you work with an agent, the contract that they start with in the negotiation starts with the last revision that they did with that agent. So typically speaking, a good agent has already gotten the really unfavorable stuff out of the contract already. So you don't even have to worry about that. And now you can just focus on, is there going to be an advance or something like that? So I think agents are well worth the 15% that they get. And a lot of good agents also know people in the media and things like that can be really useful as the book gets ready to launch, and you have to do a lot of writing to make people aware that the book's going to come out. So after you've begun to develop that voice through blogging and speaking, then I think as you've begun to get the materials for the book together, you can begin to work with an agent to get a proposal together. And the interesting thing about a proposal is it's got several sections, and obviously part of the proposal is this is what I'm going to write about, and here's the outline and maybe even a sample chapter. But one of the more important sections of a book proposal is the author platform section. And the author platform is basically, how will people have heard of you? That is, publishers know that people only buy books if there's some reason for them to purchase this book. The title and topic are a piece of that, but another big piece of it is, have they heard of you? Mm-hmm. And so they're going to want to know, who have you written for before? Where has your work appeared? In magazines or online. Do you have a following already? A Twitter following, a Facebook following, a LinkedIn following? Are there people that you can reach immediately who will be able to buy your book? And do you have connections in the media who are trusted sources that might also be able to help you sell your book?
So this was fantastic because it gave a lot of different points at different stages of it. And I loved how you started about just building that audience and finding your own voice. So I'll make 3 comments. First, about the marketing. I heard this about in the book Traction, which said, think about the advertising you're going to do after your product is built. Mm-hmm. AdWords, expose, and do that before it's built.
Right.
Yeah, and switch it around. So both you get an audience and you get feedback, and what comes out has a better chance of being in the hands of someone that will actually pay for it. Yeah. Because a lot of things fail just because people don't pay for it.
Yeah.
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 So, do the marketing before. I love what you said about blogging, and I need to do that more. But what I found was super helpful, and what I learned recently too was having an own website is great, but it's hard to get distribution because you can post on your Facebook or Twitter, and unless you've got a huge audience, your friends and family won't care that much. So what you can do is go on Medium and figure out and this goes back to what you said about know who your customer is. Figure out what your niche is. Find publications on Medium and say, hey, I'm writing an article on this. Would you be interested in putting this on the publication? Yeah. You can go from 10 views to 5,000 if you email people and ask.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Having your work appear on a site that people visit regularly anyhow is a great way for people to get exposed to you. And most of those sites are good about finding ways for people to then link back to your social media feeds so that you can build your audience having seen that. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm lucky in the sense that by virtue of being a professor at the University of Texas, I come with a certain amount of credibility by virtue of just where I work, forgetting who I am, which means that when people are looking for sources in interviews, they will call me. I am more likely to get a phone call about a story someone's working on than a random person not working at a university.
Yeah, than me.
And for example, and so that's led to several things that I think have been really valuable, but require more legwork from other people. So, for example, I write regularly for Fast Company. And I started writing for Fast Company through a very circuitous route, which is over the span of about 3 months several years ago, I got called by 4 different reporters for Entrepreneur magazine asking for quotes. And I gave quotes because anytime anybody asks you for a quote, give it, because you want reporters to owe you favors. This is important. One of the editors at Entrepreneur then wrote to me and said, I noticed that my reporters keep quoting you. Maybe you should be writing for us. And I said, okay, I'll try that. And so I wrote several articles for the online, the website at Entrepreneur. And then that editor said, I've decided to take a job at Fast Company. Would you write for me there? And I said, yes. and so I ended up there. And so, I do characterize a lot of my life as a series of happy accidents. But I think that the main thing is trying to get yourself into the community of people who find your ideas interesting and do good work for them. Because when you do good work for them, they'll ask you to do more. And writing, I have a blog site of my own that I post old Psychology Today blog entries on, and I think it's got about 800,000 hits over about 6 years, which is not zero, but it's not a ton, right? I mean, getting whatever I did, somebody else can do the math on that really quick.
Yeah.
But it's not a lot of hits, right? Whereas, my Psychology Today blog is well over 8 million hits, and I don't have the statistics on Fast Company, but people read that.
Yes, they do.
And so finding ways to be and I think this agrees with your point. You should probably maintain your own site because then you have some control over how to direct people towards information that might help you to sell
basically
a book.
Get their email.
Yeah, but the fact is that you want to be out there trying to write for other publications that are that already have the audience you want, bearing in mind that everyone already knows this, which means that the editors at those sites are inundated with requests to write for them, and they are inundated with PR pitches. So you've got to be persistent, and you've got to have something really good that's going to make them sit up and take notice.
Absolutely. There's a website out there called HARO, Help a Reporter Out.
Yeah.
And you can sign up. Well, assuming that the listener has picked an audience and they've branded themselves an expert, regardless of where they are, to get those beginner quotes, haro.com sends you daily emails about, hey, these reporters, they won't tell you where they're working from. These reporters will email you things that they're looking for, and you can actually say, hey, I'm an expert. Please be an expert.
Yeah.
And give quotes, and that's one way to gather a relationship. And also, start small.
Yeah.
Start on Medium. Start somewhere else. I'm still stuck on Medium. I need to write way more than I am, but I'm waiting on school to finish.
Sure.
Weekends.
Well, you have
That's
to have
just
the
an
time
excuse,
to
by
do
the
it.
way.
No, I get it, but you have to. There's a certain amount of time that it takes to devote to this, right? Committing to writing a book is a commitment to supporting that book before, during, and after the writing process.
Yeah.
And it's got to be, and you better be excited about the book you're writing, because you're going to be living with it for a long time. And this is, I think I told you this story. We were talking earlier, but there's a great country singer in the Austin area, Ray Wiley Hubbard, and his most famous song, I guess, is Up Against the Wall, Redneck Mother. And halfway through singing the song, every time that he does it live, and I highly recommend either getting a YouTube video or going out to see him if you can. Halfway through the song, he tells the story of how the song came into being, which involved him playing at a rural bar and having people make fun of him because of his long hair and kind of hippie ways. And he went out in the alley between sets and wrote this song. And which ends up making fun of those people. And he says, when I wrote this song, I forgot the cardinal rule of songwriting, which is that every time you write a song, you'd better be willing to sing it every night for the rest of your life. And I feel like book writing is exactly the same. You'd better be willing to talk about that book every single day for the rest of your life, because that's going to become part of what you're known for and what people are going to want to hear about.
It's not just a tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some tweets really end up badly. So,
yeah, well, that's true.
The writing process. Okay, so I've started blogging. Let's say I've hit up a few meetups in my niche in the city that I live in and say, hey, can I speak? And I've been doing that. The agent part, we can talk about that, but writing.
Yeah.
Tell me about how hard it is and the process, because I think everyone underestimates that.
Yeah, I think writing, a lot of people who say that they want to write a book, what they really mean is, I want to have written a book. They want to be done with the process, but they don't actually want to engage in the process. I think the people who are most productive in writing books actually enjoy writing. And I think that there are a couple of things that are really important to keep in mind. The first thing to keep in mind is that no sentence that leaves your brain and emerges through your pen or fingertips or whatever mode that you use to capture your prose, no sentence emerges perfectly the first time that you say it. And so a lot of people stare at the thing they just wrote and think, well, that sucks. Mm-hmm. And then they tear it up and throw it out. And I think it's far more important to just get a lot out there, to write a bunch of stuff, much of which may never survive past that first draft. That a lot of what causes writer's block for people is self-editing. So they're editing themselves on the fly, and as a result, not actually getting anything written. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to just allow yourself to write whatever you're writing and fix it later. So that's one thing. I think another thing is you've got to make writing a habit, which means that several days a week at least, you need to sit down for some period of time and get words out. Some of those words
How much time would you recommend? Half an hour, hour or two?
What I would say is you want to work an amount of time that feels like you're still productive at the end of that time. And the reason for that is if you work... So Danny Kahneman, the famous psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics, some of the work he did was on what's called the peak end rule, which is your belief about how good something, how much fun you had doing something, or how terrible it was, is a combination of the peak part of that experience and the end. Okay? And so, which means a great movie has a real highlight somewhere in the middle and it ends on an upward trajectory. With writing, if you always keep working until you're frustrated, then your memory of the writing process involves a feeling that writing is really frustrating to do. But if what you do is to work and then stop while you're still feeling like you're getting something done, now you're itching to get back to it because the last time you were working it was really great. And so I think it's important sometimes, particularly early on, until you have a lot of confidence in your own writing ability, to write less than you think you should, but to write often. So don't say, I've got a 4-hour block today, I'm going to get writing done. You're much better off finding 3 45-minute blocks during the week and getting a little bit of writing done across successive days than trying to get it all done in one day. Because I guarantee you at the end of 4 hours, you're going to be frustrated and angry that you haven't gotten enough done. Mm-hmm. But in 45 minutes, you'll feel like, whoa, I'm really cooking on this. And what that will do is over time drag you back into the writing process more often because you're excited to do it. And your ability to sustain productive effort on writing will go up over time. And so those 45-minute sessions will become an hour and 15 minutes, 2 hours, maybe even 3 or 4 hours eventually. But early on, doesn't really need to be huge time blocks. And the other reason that you'd like to develop a habit of making progress on a book you're working on in half an hour, 45-minute blocks is one of the things that stops people from completing a book is they think, well, I just don't have the time. And by the time, they mean, I don't have 4-hour blocks in my day to work on this. And that's probably true. But a lot of times you can find a 45-minute block. And if you begin to feel like I can make significant progress on something even in a 45-minute block, then you find yourself with a meeting that got canceled or something like that, and now you sit down and make progress on it, and that adds up over time.
What is this line? We overestimate what we can get done in a day, underestimate what we can get done over time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think something I've said a lot is, and I'm not the only one who said this. I mean, successful authors say this all the time. What you have to do is engage in writing as a process, and eventually a book pops out. But what you're doing is writing. And I think when people treat it as I've got to write a book, it's very hard to complete it. Partly because you're very enthusiastic at first. So for chapters 1 and 2, you dive in, you're really excited. And then you get to the chewy middle of the project where it's just you're slogging through chapters 3 through 7, and it feels like it's taking forever. And you can really give up at that point. And then if you do get towards the end, you'll race to the finish. But then the people who do it that way often never write anything ever again, because it's sort of like those people who wanted to run a marathon as opposed to be runners. And so they finish the marathon and then they're done. That's the last time they're going to do anything like that. And I think if you just develop a habit of writing regularly, then books happen as a side effect of this thing that you do a lot.
What advice would you give to someone who... Oh, yes. Time. How long... So, if I were to say I want to have a book. Wrong thing to say, first of all.
Yeah, but...
but 2 years? 1.5?
Depends.
Yeah.
And some of it depends on how often you've been saying this stuff already. I mean, this is one of the advantages of having speaking and doing speaking or workshops or other things, is that you may actually have ways of saying some of the things that you do that will allow you to write some of that very quickly and effectively. And then you may have other things that you've never really said before where it can be much harder to turn that into something readable. Mm-hmm. And so it depends that way, and there's a lot of individual differences in how fast people write. But I would say that the first time out, one way to think about this is a 230-page book, roughly, is about 70,000 words. And so, it's worth just thinking about, well, so how long does it, one thing you may have a sense of is not how long does it take me to write 70,000 words, but how long does it take me to write 500 words, which is the length of a typical blog entry. And then you can just, as a first pass, multiply that out and then ask yourself, how many years would it take me to get that amount of time together? But I would say that assuming it's going to take you a couple of years is probably reasonable. Might happen faster than that if you get on a roll, and if you get too many other things going on in your life, it might take longer. But it certainly a year is at a minimum. It's a lot. 70,000 words is a lot of words, and the other thing is the whole process is more than just that. I mean, you're going to write this book, and then you're going to go back and have to read it several times and edit it. Then you're going to send it out to people, either colleagues of yours, friends of yours, or if you're working with a publisher, you've also got their editors who are going to savage the book if they're good editors.
Yeah.
I mean, and find all the warts that they can and have you fix them. If you find an editor who reads your book and says this is fine, find a new editor, right? Because there's there's definitely something wrong with it. You need someone who's going to be ruthless in finding all of the issues. And that's the other thing. Actually, this relates to another piece. Is if you're going to write, you have to have a thick skin. In two ways. One, because the most important people are going to be the ones who give you honest feedback about what is and isn't good in what you've written, and you have to be willing, even if it takes a day to internalize the feedback and to be angry at them for a day. At some point, you got to say, "All right, it turns out I'm not perfect, and I gotta fix this." Smart Thinking. Chapter 7 of Smart Thinking went through 3 different drafts before. Completely different drafts. The editor looked at that chapter and said, "No, this isn't right." And I went and wrote it again. And he looked at that and he said, "Well, that's better, but it still isn't right." And then I found a third way to do it, and that one is the one that a version of that is what ultimately appeared in the book. And you can't just say, "No, darn it, I know better. We're going to go with my version."
How many times did you want to hit your editor?
This particular editor, I was already at a point in the amount of writing that I'd done in my life that I didn't really want to hit him. But
okay.
But there are many editors and reviewers in my life that I have wanted to hit
because they were giving you feedback,
good, honest feedback.
Yeah, but it hurts.
It does hurt, and there were and even with this editor, I would read some of his feedback, and then put it away, and then come back a day or two later, and say, "Okay, now I'm ready. I've gotten over the pain of what they just said, and now I'm going to get back to it." But yeah, look, nobody loves getting negative feedback.
Yeah.
But you have to realize that if you've got somebody working for you who's a real professional and really knows what they're doing, then chances are they're right. Yeah, every once in a while there may be something you're willing to go to the mat for, But my feeling is, if the editor didn't understand the point you were trying to make, something's wrong with what you wrote. It might be the point, or it might be the way you said it, but an editor who's actually reading it closely and carefully should get it. And if they don't, it's your fault, not theirs. Particularly because your readers are, generally speaking, not going to be more careful than your editor.
Very true. Very true. Thank you so much for this, Art. Where can people find you on social media?
So I'm on Twitter, at AB Markman. I am on Facebook. I've got my Art Markman PhD author page on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm even on Pinterest. And I've got a website, smartthinkingbook.com, where I post my old blog entries and things like that. So I'm all over the place.
And so, but if they want to search for your writing, let me know if this is incomplete, and this probably is. Fast Company, Scientific American, Psychology Today, HBR, and Entrepreneur Magazine?
So I would say, actually, the best places to find my writing these days, Psychology Today, where I try to send something out once a week or so, Fast Company, which also puts some of my stuff out roughly once a week, and then HBR several times a year. Those are probably the 3 best places. And then Two Guys on Your Head, which is my radio show and podcast produced by KUT in Austin. And that can be found on iTunes and Stitcher and NPR One and all sorts of other places where people get podcasts. And that's also a lot of fun.
That's good. I enjoy that podcast because it's very structured around concepts, and it's very bite-sized. I think the last one I listened to was an old one of yours about, you were talking about how education makes us, I cannot say that as well as you. Well, check out the podcast, and Art, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Great talking with you.